Henry Hill, Jr. was a New York City mobster. Between 1955 and 1980, Hill was associated with the Lucchese crime family. In 1980, Hill became an FBI informant, and his testimony helped secure 50 convictions, including those of mob capo, Captain Paul Vario and James Burke on multiple charges. Hill's life story was documented in the true crime book Wise Guy, Life in a Mafia Family by Nicholas Pileggi. Wise Guy was subsequently adapted by Martin Scorsese into the critically acclaimed film Goodfellas, in which Hill was portrayed by Ray Liotta. Henry Hill, Jr. was born on June 11, 1943, to Henry Hill, Sr., an immigrant Irish-American electrician, and Carmela Costa Hill, a Sicilian-American. The working-class family consisted of Henry and his 8 siblings who grew up in Brownsville, a poorer area of the East New York section of Brooklyn. From an early age, Hill admired the local mobsters who socialized across the street from his home, including Paul Vario, a capo in the Lucchese crime family. 6. In 1955, when Hill was 11 years old, he wandered into the cab stand across the street looking for a part-time after-school job. 7. In his early teens, he began running errands for patrons of Vario's storefront shoeshine, pizzeria, and dispatch cab stand. He first met the notorious hijacker and Lucchese family associate James "Jimmy the Gent" Burke in 1956. The 13-year-old Hill served drinks and sandwiches at a card game and was dazzled by Burke's open-handed tipping. He was sawbucking me to death. 20 here. 20 there. He wasn't like anyone else I had ever met. The following year, Paul Vario's younger brother, Vito "Tutty" Vario, and older brother, Lenny Vario, presented Hill with a highly sought-after union card in the bricklayers' local. Hill would be a no-show, put on a building contractor's construction payroll, guaranteeing him a weekly salary of $190. This didn't mean Hill would be getting or keeping all that money every week. He received only a portion of it, and the rest was kept and divided among the Varios. The card also allowed Hill to facilitate pickup of daily policy bets and loan payments to Vario from local construction sites. Once Hill had this legitimate job, he dropped out of high school, working exclusively for the Vario gangsters. Hill's first encounter with arson occurred when the Rebel Cab Company cab stand opened just around the corner from Vario's business. The competing company's owner was from Alabama, new to New York City. Sometime after midnight, Tutty and Hill drove to the rival cab stand with a drum full of gasoline in the backseat of Tutty's car. Hill smashed the cab windows and filled them with gasoline-soaked newspapers, then tossed in lit matchbooks. Hill was first arrested when he was 16, his arrest record is one of the few official documents that prove his existence. Hill and Lenny, Vario's equally underage son, attempted to use a stolen credit card to buy snow tires for Tutty's wife's car. When Hill and Lenny returned to Tutty's, 2 police detectives apprehended Hill. During a rough interrogation, Hill gave his name and nothing else. Vario's attorney later facilitated his release on bail. While a suspended sentence resulted, Hill's refusal to talk earned him the respect of both Vario and Burke. Burke, in particular, saw great potential in Hill. Like Burke, he was of Irish ancestry and therefore ineligible to become a made man. The Vario crew, however, were happy to have associates of any ethnicity, so long as they made money and refused to cooperate with the authorities. In June 1960, Hill joined the Army, serving with the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. Hill claimed the timing was deliberate. The FBI investigation into the 1957 Appalachian Mob Summit meeting had prompted a Senate investigation into organized crime, and its links with businesses and unions. This resulted in the publication of a list of nearly 5,000 names of members and associates of the 5 major crime families. Hill searched through a partial list but could not find Vario listed among the Lucchese family. Throughout his 3-year enlistment, Hill maintained his mob contacts. He also continued to hustle, in charge of kitchen detail, He sold surplus food, loaned shark pay advances to fellow soldiers, and sold tax-free cigarettes. Before his discharge, Hill spent 2 months in the stockade for stealing a local sheriff's car, and brawling in a bar with a civilian and Marines. In 1963, Hill returned to New York and began the most notorious phase of his criminal career: arson, intimidation, running an organized stolen car ring, and hijacking trucks. In 1965, Hill met his future wife, Karen Friedman, through Paul Vario, Jr., though the film Goodfellas replaces him with Thomas "Tommy" DeSimone. Paul insisted that Hill accompany him on a double date at Frankie the Wop Manzo's restaurant, Villa Capra. According to Friedman, the date was disastrous, and Hill stood her up at the next dinner date. Afterward, the two began going on dates at the Copacabana and other nightclubs, where Friedman was introduced to Hill's outwardly impressive lifestyle. The two later got married in a large North Carolina wedding, attended by most of Hill's gangster friends. Air France heist. On December 11, 1978, Hill and Jimmy Burke pulled the Lufthansa heist. Hill had heard from Robert "Frenchie" McMahon that his employer, Lufthansa, was handling a shipment of $6 million in cash and jewelry. The main problem was a guard with a key to the safe. They identified the guard's weakness for women. They got the guard drunk and took him to a motel, where a prostitute waited to distract him. When the guard took off his pants to change into a bathrobe, they took his ring of keys. Not knowing which key led to the vault, the mobsters simply made duplicate copies of as many of the keys as possible, then replaced the original keyring without his knowledge. At 11:40 p.m. on a Saturday, Hill and Burke drove to the Air France cargo parking lot in a rented car sporting false plates. They left with a $6 million haul. Hill and DeSimone paid a $750,000 tribute to two mob chiefs. They were Sebastian "Buster" Alloy, the 57-year-old capo for the Colombo crime family, who considered Kennedy Airport their turf, and their own capo, Paul Vario. Hill began wholesaling marijuana, cocaine, heroin, and quaaludes based on connections he made in prison. He earned enormous amounts of money. A young kid who was a mule of Hill's ratted Hill out to narcotics detectives Daniel Mann and William Broder. The youngster, so named by the detectives, informed them that the supplier, Henry Hill, was connected to the Lucchese crime family and was a close friend to Paul Vario and to Jimmy Burke and had probably been in on the Lufthansa robbery. Knowing who Hill was and what he did, they put surveillance on him, taking pictures. They found out that Hill's old prison friend from Pittsburgh ran a dog grooming salon as a front. Mann and Broder had thousands of wiretaps of Hill. But Hill and his crew used coded language in the conversations. On April 27, 1980, Hill was arrested on a narcotics trafficking charge. He became convinced that his former associates planned to have him killed, Vario, for dealing drugs, and Burke, to prevent Hill from implicating him in the Lufthansa heist. Hill heard on a wiretap that his associates Angelo Seep and Anthony Stable were anxious to have Hill killed, and that they were telling Burke that Hill is no good, and that he is a junkie. Burke told them not to worry about it. Hill was more convinced by a surveillance tape played to him by federal investigators, in which Burke tells Vario of their need to have Hill whacked. But Hill still wouldn't talk to the investigators. While in his cell, the officers would tell Hill that the prosecutor, Ed McDonald, wanted to speak with him, and Hill would yell, "Fuck you and McDonald." Hill became even more paranoid because he thought Burke had officers on the inside and would have him killed. While Karen was worried, she kept getting calls from Jimmy Burke's wife, Mickey, asking when Hill was coming home, or if Karen needed anything. Hill knew the calls were prompted by Jimmy. When Hill was finally released on bail, he met Burke at a restaurant they always went to. Burke told Hill that they should meet at a bar Hill had never heard of or seen before, owned by Charlie the Jap. However, Hill never met Burke there. Instead, they met at Burke's sweatshop with Karen and asked for the address in Florida where Hill was to kill Bobby Germain's son with Anthony Stable. Hill knew he was going to get killed in Florida, but he needed to stay on the streets to make money. McDonald didn't want to take any chances and arrested Hill as a material witness in the Lufthansa robbery. Hill then agreed to become an informant and signed an agreement with the United States Department of Justice Organized Crime Strike Force on May 27, 1980. In 2011, former junior mob associate Greg Buxaroni alleged that, after Hill's 1980 arrest, Jimmy Burke offered him money to arrange a meeting between Buxaroni and Hill at a Brooklyn grocery store so that Burke could have Hill murdered gangland fashion, but Buxaroni decided quietly against having any involvement with the hit on Hill. Shortly afterwards, Burke and several other Lucchese crime family members were arrested by federal authorities. Hill testified against his former associates to avoid a possible execution by his crew or going to prison for his crimes. His testimony led to 50 convictions. Jimmy Burke was given 20 years in prison for the 1978–79 Boston College point shaving scandal, involving fixing Boston College basketball games. Burke was also later sentenced to life in prison for the murder of scam artist Richard Eaton. Burke died of lung cancer while serving his life sentence, on April 13, 1996, at the age of 64. Paul Vario received 4 years for helping Henry Hill obtain a no-show job to get him paroled from prison. Vario was also later sentenced to 10 years in prison for the extortion of air freight companies at JFK Airport. He died of respiratory failure on November 22, 1988, at age 73 while incarcerated in the FCI Federal Prison in Fort Worth. Hill, his wife Karen, and their 2 children, Greg and Gina, entered the U.S. Marshals Witness Protection Program in 1980, changed their names, and moved to undisclosed locations in Omaha, Nebraska, Independence, Kentucky, Redmond, Washington, and Seattle, Washington. In Seattle, Hill hosted backyard cookouts for his neighbors, and on one occasion, while under the influence of a combination of liquor and drugs, he revealed his true identity to his guests. To the ire of the federal marshals, they were forced to relocate him one final time to Sarasota, Florida. There, a few months had passed, and Hill repeated the same breach of security, causing the government to finally expel him from the Federal Witness Protection Program. Goodfellas movie. Goodfellas is a 1990 American crime film directed by Martin Scorsese. It is a film adaptation of the 1986 non-fiction book Wise Guy by Nicholas Pileggi, who co-wrote the screenplay with Scorsese. The film follows the rise and fall of Lucchese crime family associates Henry Hill and his friends from 1955 to 1980. Scorsese initially named the film Wise Guy, but postponed it, and later, with Pileggi's agreement, changed the name to Goodfellas to avoid confusion with the unrelated television series Wise Guy. To prepare for their roles in the film, Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci, and Ray Liotta often spoke with Pileggi, who shared research material he gathered while writing the book. According to Pesci, improvisation and ad-libbing came out of rehearsals where Scorsese gave the actors freedom to do whatever they wanted. The director made transcripts of these sessions, took the lines he liked best, and put them into a revised script the cast worked from during principal photography. In the fall of 2006, Hill appeared in a photo shoot along with Ray Liotta for Entertainment Weekly. At Liotta's urging, Hill entered alcohol rehabilitation 2 days after the shoot. Prior to his death, Henry Hill collaborated with the novelist, Daniel Simone, in writing and developing a forthcoming non-fiction book titled, The Lufthansa Heist, a portrayal of the famous 1978 Lufthansa airline robbery at Kennedy Airport. Hill died in a Los Angeles hospital on June 12, 2012, one day after his 69th birthday. Hill's girlfriend for the last 14 years of his life, Lisa Caserta, said, "He had been sick for a long time. His heart gave out." And CBS News reported Caserta saying, "He went out pretty peacefully, for a good fella." She said Hill recently suffered a heart attack before his death and that Hill died of complications from long-time heart problems related to smoking. Hill's family was present when he died. Hill was cremated the day after his death.